Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever that you are, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, Digital Media Relations Manager here in Chesterfield. I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air one last time in the year of our Lord 2024. It is our year in review episode. I'm very glad to have Jim McConnell with me as always. Jim, welcome back to the podcast, sir. How are you?
Very well, Brad. Thank you very much.
I like that you make a habit now of being on the podcast. This is like a thing that you're just always here, and I dig that about you.
Yeah, I love that too, and I have so much fun with it. I think I'm just going to start like podcast bombing episodes and just be like showing up to places and be like, "What the heck's he doing here?"
Yeah. Well, as I said, we're here for the year in review episode. This is our chance to sort of look back at the year that was 2024. If you haven't had a chance yet, definitely go check out the State of the County podcast that we did at the chamber event, the chamber meeting, I guess I should say, the first live podcast we've ever recorded. Very glad that is in the past. But one of the things about that, Jim, that allowed us to do was to kind of look back at 2024 from a variety of different fronts. Here, we're going to focus a little bit on the stories and the news and the sort of things that happened, more so than just sort of extrapolating out a lot of sort of the what it means. We kind of leave those things to the folks that we had on the panel. We had Dr. Casey, we had Jesse Smith, we had Stephanie Brown and Katie Cominsky. So again, shout out to all of them for being with me on that adventure. Very, very thankful to have had such a great panel to do that first live podcast. But here, you and I, we get to talk a little bit about sort of what were the things that happened, and we get to go through them a little bit. Before we jump into this, I want to make sure, so we're recording this a little before Christmas. There's been some big news that has just broken related to a brand new economic development announcement from the governor's office. That was a big to-do. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We have not had a lot of time to process all of what that could mean for Chesterfield, for the region, for the state, all of it. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. Jim, overall, as you look back on 2024, as we close the door on the year that was, what last year when we did this, there were some themes. What do you feel like there are any themes as you look back at 2024?
Sure. I would say that the sort of theme of delivering on things that we prioritize as a government, everywhere Dr. Casey and the board members go, they talk about a couple things, education, infrastructure, providing high quality service at the lowest possible sort of rates and trying to be very efficient in our operations. And we have definitely done that in a lot of different ways this year and continue to do so.
It feels like if you look back at the year, there are a handful of announcements and things that got sort of announced that, like to your point, were part of that bond referendum, right? And, 2022 feels like a long time ago in some ways, but in some ways it's not, because so much of what came out of that bond referendum is coming to fruition now. So it's like the connective tissue is so clearly there. So when you think about, all of the various ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, right? A.M. Davis, Matoka Fire Station, Falling Creek Middle, Bensley, the Cogville Park, the Western Area Elementary School groundbreaking. There's just so much stuff that came out of the ground this year. And I think that is one of the things that when I look back at 2024, especially for our office, because we do a whole lot of stuff on all of those kinds of groundbreakings, right? You write a lot of blogs, we're doing podcasts, we're doing news releases of that nature. Those events really stand out for us because it felt like every time we turned around, there was another one. And there were so many of them to sort of choose from that it's hard not to look at that as a group. And to your point, delivering, sort of on all of the promises and all of the sort of plans, things coming to fruition, things coming out of the ground, breaking ground so things can come out of the ground. It sort of feels like all of that stuff really is sort of becoming a reality in a lot of ways.
Definitely. There's a ton of momentum, and there's a lot of, I hear from people sometimes who say, well, we're growing and I don't see sort of the response or anything to address that growth. And I'm like, well, you need to look around because there are things addressing population growth happening around here every day. I mean, literally, it's so much. There are so many new schools, road projects. I mean, it's not hard to notice if you look around and you'll see, like, we're a growing community, and these are the things that happen in a growing community.
Right.
It just one generally does follow the other.
Yeah, and there's a whole mindset of, sort of delivering on the promise of not just like what you said you're going to do, but what people expect you to do, right? And so, if you think about the cadence of these things, right? The way that it did feel like, it was just happening a lot. And a lot of that comes down to planning, right? Making sure that after that bond referendum was passed overwhelmingly by the public, those projects could get online and they could sort of, and when I say online there, I mean like in terms of like on the path, so to speak, right? And a lot of what you're seeing now is addressing, not just, to your point, things that like the powers that be might think people want or need. It's also things that people have said they do want and need, especially on the school system front. I thought it was really telling at the State of the County to hear Dr. Murray explaining sort of the school system's viewpoint on the various buildings that are going to be opening in the next couple of years and what it all means for them. And what that already, there's a high bar for the services that are delivered in Chesterfield County, both on the government side and on the school side. And the idea that like that bar is going to be raised in part because people have given it so much support. You almost look at it from the standpoint of when all of these different groundbreakings and buildings that are coming out of the ground, they're not even remotely done. There's still a lot of other pieces to that bond referendum that will come out in the coming years. I think the other thing, to your point earlier, there's an efficiency part of this, right? There's there's a way to do the thing. And I think between the 25-cent personal property tax cut and the way that Chesterfield has leveraged its CVTA local funds to help jumpstart the Powhite Parkway extension and what that means for people to really turn those dots into lines. The more we get into that piece of things, I think it is extremely newsworthy as you look back at 2024 to think about what that property tax cut and the money that was leveraged to create that sort of initial phase one funding. Those are two huge developments for the people of Chesterfield.
No doubt. And when you can start accomplishing more, I don't know, I'm not a math person, right? So I'm sort of very basic. I didn't take a ton of math in college. I'm a word guy. But when you can see the tax rate over time has fallen, and I understand assessments go up, but the tax rate and the real sort of push to recognize that the taxes, we want to be very efficient with how we spend the taxpayers' dollars, but at the same time, we're accomplishing things.
Right.
So it's not just saying, okay, well, we're spending less.
Yeah. And
right?
there's
That's only half the
right.
conversation, right? If you're spending less, but you're not actually doing anything,
right.
You're not helping anyone. You're not.
The value that they get to, right? If you look at it from the standpoint of the efficiency side, there are numerous opportunities. If you're you're a AAA bond rated locality like Chesterfield, and you handle finances the way Chesterfield does, you can make more money, make more out of what you get. And that's certainly been the case over and over again. And you look at that $300 million, the Powhite extension, it's hard to really sort of put into an effective, efficient explanation of like how important that could be for Chesterfield and for the region and for the state, because there is so much tied to that if all it was simply just from a traffic standpoint, it would be phenomenal, right? But it's not just that. It is the opportunity for a whole lot of improvements that go well beyond just, hey, we're going to make everything easier on the traffic front. And I will say, having worked so closely with the CVTA and done a couple of different videos and things over the last couple of years in terms of the various projects that they're funding throughout the 9 localities in their region, it's really staggering to think of like what it would be like if that group didn't have the reach that it does, right?
Or if it didn't exist.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. If it was different or it wasn't here at all, right? There are so many things that are so, and not just here, but all throughout the region, right? But like everything will get a little bit better. And that delivering, that sort of theme you touched on earlier, right? The idea of delivering on things. Chesterfield has been a big proponent of the CVTA, been a big, huge part of it. Kevin Carroll from the Matoka District was a former chair of that group. Certainly a very loud voice, I think it's fair to say, right? In that room, somebody who really understands what it takes to get these things done for the various localities in the region. Speaking of things getting done, I also want to touch on it's felt like a really big year for SVE, Sports Visitation and Entertainment. They had the launch of Restaurant Week. They had the launch of Outdoor Fest. They had the Hall of Fame. They got the additional fields at River City, and of course they had Cole. It feels like that department, J.C. Pohm and his group, are just doing phenomenal things. And every time I turn around, it's either groundbreaking or SVE is doing something cool. Because when you think about like the Diamonds at Iron Bridge, right? That's a crown jewel, so to speak, right? And it's going to bring a lot of people here. This entire group brings a lot of people here the opportunity to not just champion those who are already here, but also to sort of allow for the infrastructure that people here can use to also be used by other tournaments and things. And it does portend to, I think, a really bright future, not just for that department, but also for the way that it impacts the overall big picture for Chesterfield County.
No question. And it's the greatest thing about, like, when you have a win-win. We sort of love the win-wins because you're enhancing the quality of life for the people who live here, which you always want to focus on first, second, third. It's all about the people who live here, but you're also doing so by adding to the county's bottom line. And it's sort of like, if you can do that, I don't understand why you wouldn't. Like, the whole idea of everything they do is such a net add for the organization, for the county, for the community. You look around at the things, they're making things better.
Right.
And I'm sort of staggered by what they've been able to get done in a year's time. I mean, it has been, like, when we talk about all these events and everything, they've been right in the center of a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's been a lot, and very impressive to see. They just hit the ground running. They got organized and formed, and it was a pretty small shop, and they just started doing stuff, and you kind of look around and go, wow, they got a lot done.
Yeah, getting a lot done. Speaking of getting done, one of the things that got done in 2024 that we maybe didn't expect as we sat here a year ago was having to select a new police chief. I believe at that point we were still a little ways until Colonel Katz announced that he was retiring and heading out of town. That process, as I've told folks, is one of the most unique things I've ever seen in all of like local government. I don't believe there's anybody in the state who does anything like what we do. It's in the charter, the whole process. It is a long process, and having talked to Colonel Carpenter prior to the state of the county last week as we recorded it, it's an arduous process, right? When you decide you want to throw your hat in that ring, it's a long time until you get to the end of the road. And for Chesterfield to go through that process, it took a lot of people's involvement, took a whole lot of people looking at a lot of various things, took a committee, took a group of applicants and people going through interviews and all that fun stuff, and to come out on the other side and have somebody who, to your point, has hit the ground running. I'm trying to get Colonel Carpenter on the podcast sometime first of the year. And let me tell you, that dude's schedule is busy.
Yeah, he's busy.
He's a busy man. But
yes.
that's as we look back on 2024, that's got to be one of the biggest sort of items of the year, right? Is because that process is so unique and because it's such a long, drawn out, it's a very intentional process. And then for one of your own to come out through that, I think says a lot about sort of where the department is and where it's going.
And it also says something about the strength of the organization more broadly, because we had a new board come in January. And one of the first things that happened to this new board was our police chief, who is beloved by everyone, says, well, I'm leaving. And that's in a weaker organization, in a wobbly sort of unwell managed organization. That's not a great word, unwell, but a poorly managed organization. Having something like that is like a seismic sort of, because you have a new board and they're still trying to talk to each other and figure out where that thing was as seamless.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, well, we know what to do.
Right.
We've done this. We've done it well. We're going to continue to do it well. There's a process here, and everything just sort of worked together. And it just does really speak to the fact that so much of this is built into the DNA of the organization.
Right.
And that people take just understand, like, the people who live here take comfort in the fact that the people who make these decisions know what they're doing.
And this goes back to the theme, right? Delivering on promises, right? The promise of that process is that it will yield what it's supposed to yield, right? Organizations are designed for the results that they receive, right? And that's exactly what sort of happened here. And, if you think about something like that, the Midlothian Library opening, right? Something that was long wanted, long held. You think about the execution on both of those things, right? Huge newsworthy pieces for the community, right? But very different means, right? Midlothian was something that, people wanted that for a long time, and and it was delivered in a way that really, I think, delighted a lot of folks. And that facility that is getting so much use, and it's kind of like, for the library, it's really kind of a crown jewel in a lot of ways, right? And you think about the police chief thing, which is unexpected, but because you do have those plans of how it's supposed to look, again, you get to the end of the process, and that's sort of what you have. We would be remiss, and I got to go back to it, if we didn't talk a little bit about economic development. A very good, when you have the kind of years that Garrett Hart and his folks over there have had, it's almost impossible, right? You can't win, the Bulls can't win 72 games every season, right? But at the same time, you look at what they were able to do this year with with Condair, the data center. There's a lot that goes into all of these types of announcements, but this one from Commonwealth Fusion Systems to build the world's first commercial fusion power plant. I'm going to borrow heavily here for a hot second from the release, but essentially, this is the largest private fusion company in the world. And they want to essentially build the world's first grid-scale commercial fusion power plant at the James Road Industrial Park. So Dominion is involved in this as a non-financial collaboration. They own the proposed site, but apparently CFS is going to do the work. They're going to independently finance, build, own, and operate this facility, which is going to create all kinds of opportunities for, not just for clean energy, but to do it in a way that will make a huge impact.
The scale of it is to be able to power 150,000 homes with this one project. The scale is sort of unprecedented, because when you think about that, like, I don't think people realize we don't have 150,000 homes in this county right now.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you're talking about being able to power every single home in the county with this one project.
Yeah. This new arc fusion. When you start talking about arc fusion, it sounds like Marvel to me, right?
Yeah, super.
Like Tony Stark's going to be coming through there with the arc reactor and stuff. But it's going to generate billions of dollars in economic development in the region and create hundreds of jobs during construction and long-term operation of the power plant. 400 megawatts of electricity, which, as Jim mentioned, enough power to power large industrial sites or about 150,000 homes. Expected its first plasma in 2026 and net fusion shortly thereafter. Now, listen, I'm not a scientist. I love Marvel movies, but I'm not a scientist, so I don't claim to know how all this works, other than, this is a clean industry. There aren't the fear that you might have with a nuclear power plant. Those kinds of things are just not a realistic, viable concern here. This is obviously a very monumental piece of news for not just Chesterfield, but for the region and the state. And the idea that it happens right here, right before the sort of the final gun on 2024, I think is pretty fun. To think that this thing, which would be like the biggest news of the year, regardless of when it happened right here at the end, and certainly is a huge boon for Chesterfield County.
And so much, like, when you talk about momentum, when you get a project like Lego a couple of years ago, the great thing about Lego is it's not just that project. You land it, and then everybody in the world goes, maybe I should take a look at this place that Legos decided to go to.
Yeah.
What is it about this place that Lego thought was so great? And now you see this momentum coming. And the great thing about being able to talk about Garrett and his team and everything they do is they're doing things that are coming that we don't even know about, but there's a lot coming, and that they're working behind the scenes every day so that 2025, 2026,
Right.
2027, there is stuff coming here that's going to change the tax base in a positive way and really impact the lives of the people who live here, the businesses, in such a positive way going forward that it's like, just hold on to your, your socks or whatever. Like, just hold on, because there's great stuff coming.
Yeah. And again, delivering on the promises, right? Real quick, let me put a bow on this before we wrap up. So fusion is a process that basically occurs when light atoms like hydrogen combine to form heavier atoms like helium. So essentially, the idea here is that ARC will use powerful magnets to confine and control the fusion fuel, and then captures the energy released and converts it to electrical power. It uses two forms of hydrogen as fuel, and there's no concerns, as I mentioned before. It's a completely safe process. There's no possibility of any runaway chain reaction or meltdown. There's no, none of the worries that you might have with a nuclear, where you got radioactive waste or anything of that nature. It's one of those processes where it sounds like the kind of future that we all sort of have been waiting for. Now, how many of these can they build? Where does this go? All this fun stuff, that's all for future, folks for future Brad and Jim to talk about on podcasts. For now, we know about this one, and this is a really interesting project, and certainly, to your point, something that that delivers on the promise. For I think a lot of us as we grew up, this is the kind of thing we thought would be, these sort of donut shaped, fusion plants, reactor, however you want to frame it. It's kind of fun to think about, not just that this is becoming a reality, but that's happening here in Chesterfield County. Jim, let's get out here on this one. As you look to 2025, I think if we sat here a year ago and I told you, it's like, actually, next year when we record this podcast, we're going to be talking about a fusion power plant. Both of us would have been like, I'm sorry, what? And there's so many things that happened in 2024 that we would not have seen coming. So I'm not going to ask you to play soothsayer and tell me, like, look into your crystal ball and tell me, what do you see in 2025? But what are some of the things that you're sort of excited about coming in 2025? Because it'll be here before we know it.
Absolutely. And I would say probably one of my most favorites, terrible English, but one of my sort of things that I'm really looking forward to is for the buildings at Springline to start open. And because the office building, it's a really creative sort of, like, we do a lot of really creative stuff here, and government doesn't get a ton of credit for being creative or being nimble or whatever. But what's happening over there at Springline, being able to put our school administration in that office building there, is opening up hundreds of seats for career and technical education at CTC Hall.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is saving the taxpayers. If you wanted to build a new tech center, you know what that would cost? Probably 50 upwards, $60 million.
Maybe not as much as an arc reactor, though.
No, probably not. But again, I'm not Tony Stark, and I did not stay at Holiday Inn Express last night, so I can't comment on any of that stuff.
Nice. Well done.
It's all completely Greek to me, so I'm going to stay out of the science. I'll leave that up to you.
Well, that's great.
But just that kind of thing, there are things coming that are tangible. Sort of, the police department is really going to start moving forward on permanent police precinct stations across the county. They've got that whole plan mapped out and everything. Just nothing but good things coming.
Yeah.
And I just, as somebody who lives here, I've lived here 30 years. The Chesterfield that is coming now and is coming in the future is just something that I'm like, there are things happening here that, like, I just never would have imagined.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We have a mascot. He's dancing around. He's throwing T-shirts. Like, it's like, if you had asked me 10 years ago, is this Chesterfield? I would have been like, I don't know.
Yeah, delivering on those promises and sort of, as Dr. Casey likes to say, not resting on your laurels.
Never.
I think that one of the things that is bound to happen when we sit down a year from now and do this podcast is we will definitely be talking about a lot more ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, because if there's anything we've learned, it's that the progress doesn't stop. And there's lots of ways for the county to address the needs and the desires and wants of the people, of the customers, essentially, right? And I'm really excited to cover it all with you and to have another year under our belts.
Looking forward to it.
Yep, should be good. Jim, thank you very much for the time, sir. I very much appreciate you.
Thank you, Brad.
All right. Make sure you check us out on social media. On Twitter, it's at Chesterfield BA. On Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, you can check out our podcast page. Just search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Now, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever it is that your programs are sold. And if you're so inclined to give us a rating and review, we greatly appreciate it. As always, the video version of our show is available on our YouTube channel, as well as on our website at Chesterfield.gov/podcast. That's also where you can submit feedback anytime, make a suggestion, or you can just reach out to us. You can watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7 and on the weekends at noon. That is Comcast Channel 98, Verizon Channel 128. Lastly, check out Chesterfield.gov/connect with us to find out a number of other ways to connect with Chesterfield County. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the good folks from Stitch and Media Services for all they do. And my thanks to you for joining us today. So from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making this part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care. Happy New Year.
From blogs to podcasts, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again.
Weekly video segments and newsletters,
Social media, the latest community news,
And this is your Chesterfield News Minute for September 19th.
how to get in touch, and everything in between. If you want to know about Chesterfield County, our Connect With Us webpage has you covered. Chesterfield.gov/connect with us. Connect with us, your source for all things Chesterfield.